Welcome to the Sultans of Sales podcast. I'm your host, Jamil Pendleton. My friends call me Jay. Our guest today is just such an incredible human being, and we are honored to have Dr. Martin Pham join the program today. Dr. Pham is a neurosurgeon, UC San Diego, and I wanted to give you, Dr. Pham, the platform to introduce yourself because I think you'll do it better than I can. Thank you again for joining, and tell us about yourself, Doc.
No, of course. Well, I appreciate the invitation, Jay. And about me, like you mentioned, I'm a neurosurgeon here in San Diego. I work at UC San Diego as an assistant professor in the Department of Neurosurgery. Having ended up in San Diego, I'm actually from Southern California myself. So, I did my medical school training in Chicago, and I did spend a year in fellowship in New York. So I've done hops and jumps around the country, but being from Southern California, it was definitely hard to not come back. And I was lucky enough to come back to where I was growing up.
It's a wonderful place. My dad's from Ventura, Santa Paula, actually. So a little bit obviously north of you, but I've been traveling to Southern California since I was a real small kid to be with my cousins and family out there. And it is a special place. So
yeah.
When you mentioned New York, was that with Dr. Larry Lenke?
Yes. So it was with Larry Lenke, Ron Lehman, Dan Rue, and it was my 8th year in postgraduate training. So neurosurgery is 7 years. And then I took an optional 8th year in fellowship. And it was a very formative year. Residency training, as pretty much any physician will tell you, is a very, steep learning curve. And
Yes.
But when we do fellowship years, which for the most part for neurosurgeons are optional, I chose that fellowship. I was lucky enough to be selected for it. And it was an exceptionally phenomenal year to really capture all the nuances from true experts, in their field. And I tried to take the best out of all of them as they said that we should, and, carry it forward into my growing career.
That's so awesome. Nuance, I think, is the perfect word for what a fellowship is all about. And can you dig in a little bit more for maybe something that you still use today from your time in New York?
Oh, of course. There are so many things. And what was wonderful about that fellowship was I had the benefit of training, under 3 people who were very good in each of their own respective interests. As you know, Larry Lenke is world renowned for deformity. And so although I had been trained at USC on how to understand deformity, correct deformity, both place the instrumentation and do the corrections, there are all of these extra levels that are gained through experience. And now as an apprentice to someone who is, so phenomenally gifted, I can capture some of those nuances, as I said earlier, without having to go through in a way that the years and years it took for him to learn it. And so some of that is able to be distilled, and in a way I get a little bit of a jump and a fast forward in my own learning process. That's with Larry Lenke. And then Dan Rue, of course, is first and foremost one of the best cervical spine surgeons that I know. And I think many people would agree with that as well, capturing what he learned as well in doing just cervical spine surgery for 25 years.
Sure.
And then Ron Lehman is someone who, of the 2 prior, I think Ron is someone who I will readily admit I try to model myself after. He's someone who's much closer in terms of my targets for career. He's accomplished both as a surgeon, both in his research accomplishments, and just both in his clinical and social demeanor, right? And how he runs his team and how he runs the hospital. And from him, I learned a lot of the breadth of a variety of neurosurgery. So both from the degenerative side and the deformity side, in what most successful spine surgeons' practices would look like, and one that I hope to model my practice after, in the coming future.
And I think you're doing a great job. From my perspective, we've worked together here for some time now, and I've seen what you're doing. I think you're, like, as you mentioned, your goal of emulating the best from all 3, Dr. Lenke, Dr. Rue, Dr. Lehman, is happening. And it's fun for me to get even a glimpse of it, right? From the team in San Diego who share with me some of your success stories, your patient stories, your outcomes. And then also as a fanboy follower of you on Instagram, it's fun to see the behind the scenes, right? Of Bart and Pham. Yeah, you're just such a cool guy. You're a great guy, and what a gift to the patient community, right? That you already are. So
Well, I definitely appreciate that. Remind me to send the check in the mail to your address.
hey man, just you being on here, right, will give me and the audience such a gift of learning a little bit more about you. So thank you. And let's start at the beginning, because I think you talk about this or in arrears, right? If you're familiar with Shakespeare, right, the in medias res version of telling a story, you tell such a captivating story about you and you go back to, PGY, whatever it is you talk about. You've done a phenomenal job of whether you journal or where you get these maybe comments or notes to yourself, to your mom, whatever. I'm so fascinated in that. And so is it something that you always had just a knack for, just documenting and sharing your story? Why do you do that?
I mean, it's a very good question, I think. And I would probably be able to answer it in a variety of very general and specific ways. When I grew up, I loved to read. And so a love of books and a love of reading was something that I had as a young child. And it was to the point where my mother, she bought me a book light, and she would have to tell me to stop using it whenever I was in the car, reading at night, or reading in the room, in the bedroom at nighttime when everything was dark already.
Sure.
But I always had a love of books and stories in general. And right around, it must have been middle school, I started journaling. I had a crush on this girl, and I had no way else to get out these thoughts except to write it down. And
that's right.
And I remember for an entire year in middle school, I would write down these notes about, oh, I saw her today and she looked so pretty, and God, I wish she would talk to me. And
Great.
I'm this 12-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And I remember one day, because the journal wasn't in a formal book, it was just on a bunch of sheets of paper in a report cover. And my mom, I think in one of our moves, ended up losing it. I mean, it must have been thrown away, or so I was so upset. I remember, because I had all these thoughts that I could no longer look back on. But I think, as I grew older in high school and college, every once in a while, I would jot down these small memories, I guess, and, the experiences that we lived through. And I think I grew up as a pretty introspective child.
Right.
And I always thought that the memories that we live make who we are. And it's very easy to start to forget some of them. And, for very special events in our lives, or very formative ones, I always liked the idea of jotting down my thoughts in that moment. Yes. Because in retrospect, our memories in hindsight will color all of our experiences. And I always thought that it would be special to see what I felt like in that moment. So, and this was just in high school, college, but especially when I went to medical school and then neurosurgery residency. I was fortunate enough, blessed enough, lucky enough, however you want to say it, to match into neurosurgery. And understanding that what I was getting into was something that was so unknown, right? Short of the people who've already gone through it. And I remember being a medical student and trying to imagine what it would be like to train as a neurosurgeon, and really having no idea beyond seeing the residents themselves. So as I went through it, I remember writing down notes, and some of them are just memories that are so, they're so indelible now, right? They're so unforgettable.
Wow. Absolutely.
But capturing that, and now kind of being able to look back on that in that investment, I think in that time is something really special, because it's something, I mean, I guess it's how people write books and publish them.
Absolutely.
But it's something that I, can give to the folks who are behind me to actually have a better glimpse of what it was like, at least for me.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm a huge journal junkie, if you will. I've journaled for the better part of my professional career. I journaled when I took a gap year between IBM and this med tech world now that I've been in for 13 years. But there was a time when I was 25 and my best friend and I took a trip around the world. We backpacked, we, and just looking back on some of those journals now, like you said, it's impossible to take yourself back to where you were in residency, unless sometimes some of those memories are burned forever, but like you now have the gift of your thoughts in that moment. And I love, because I'm smiling when you're talking about your crush, because I did the exact same thing. Like I would write, not only would I write journals, and sometimes I would actually put them in her locker. I ended up getting, we don't have to go there, but it's fun. It's fun to look back on like where things start. Right. And absolutely appreciate you sharing that. So what about, if you take maybe one step further back, what made you want to become a surgeon? And did you always know that was going to be your path?
Yeah, I mean, I think that wanting to become a physician was definitely the first part. And I think it was around middle school, I'm in all these classes, and I really enjoyed science, right? The biological sciences, physics, chemistry, but I really like biology a lot. And then it was in high school where, I started realizing that of all the things I wanted to do, I think something in biology or science was going to do it. It wasn't until I volunteered at a hospital. In high school, they tell you to do a lot of things, do a lot of volunteering. Right. And, with regards to volunteering, I volunteered at the local hospital. And when I did that, as most volunteers in high school do, they just have you do the very straightforward things, opening doors, pushing people in wheelchairs. Mm-hmm. And I was hanging out at the nursing station one day, manning the main doors. And one of the nurses came out holding this baby, and I'm an only child, or I was the only child at the time. And I remember being 16, and they're like, do you want to help me with this baby? His name was Vincent. I still remember his name.
Awesome.
Because she asked me to hold him and then feed him, right? And I feed him a bottle. And it was just gosh, for people who grow up with siblings, or for people who grew up in large families, this may seem like something so small, but for me, holding this child and then being told that he had pneumonia and he was in the hospital, and we're trying to get him better, as far as I understood, it was an epiphany that my love of science, my love of biology, didn't necessarily just have to stop there for my own benefit, right? Medicine, what I realized there was using that knowledge directly to help people in a very direct way, right? I mean, there are a lot of ways that people use science to help people. I mean, all the wonderful scientists who developed the COVID vaccine, people who are working on a variety of different treatments. Mm-hmm. But I think for me, what made such an impact was the thought that I could use something that I really enjoyed learning and directly help someone. Wow. Which was medicine. I mean, that is medicine in a nutshell. It wasn't until I think medical school that I realized then that surgery was going to be the path that I would choose. Mm-hmm. And in medical school, when I went there, I thought I was going to be a pediatrician, which was the only physician I ever knew, right? No one in my family was a physician, and the pediatrician was the doctor I went to. Right. And in medical school, I met a lot of people who already knew at the time what they wanted to do. And they were telling me a variety of fields, and some of them said that they were going to be a surgeon. And I asked them why. And I remember they said things like, either there was a surgeon in their family, or they had surgery, so they had a personal experience. But other ones just mentioned that they liked working with their hands, and they grew up building things, and they liked to solve problems. Right. And it never occurred to me that that's what surgery was, right? I'd never known a surgeon in my life. And within those first few weeks, I began looking into what surgeons do. And that was my next kind of epiphany, to realize that you could go into a medical career working with your hands and help people and be very fulfilled. Because when I look back in my life, I realized that I also worked with my hands. I built, radio controlled cars. I built my own computer. When I was in college, my friends and I would tear down our cars and put ridiculous stuff on them, and just learning how things worked. I derived a lot of enjoyment from it. And to now be told that there's actually a medical field called surgery, where I could do that for a living, for my career, help people, and be fulfilled. It was, it was a win-win all around for me. And then going into neurosurgery itself was just the love of the nervous system and the types of patients in them. But that was kind of my path. So it definitely wasn't something that I knew growing up, but it was something that either I found or something that eventually found me.
That's fascinating and beautiful. And thank you for sharing, because I mean, I think you touched on a lot of great things. I mean, regardless of what people do, that you ask people why, and then you tapped into something very, I guess, simple. Surgery is carpentry, especially spine surgery, right? And I see you building woodworks and things like that. I mean, you've always kind of, done those things. So let's go there. Let's skip a little bit around. What do you do outside of surgery, right? What are your hobbies? What are some of the things? I mean, I think for those of us that follow you on Insta, we see some of these things. But maybe touch on that.
Think when I was obviously like most of us, when we're growing up in high school and college, we have a lot more hobbies than as we, get into our careers and enter adulthood and responsibility. But, the things that I spent a lot of time doing in college, I played a lot of pool. So billiards, as with most people, it stemmed from the machismo of going to a pool hall, and I lost terribly. And it inspired me in college to actually take some lessons and compete. And I joined the UCLA team. I made it to state for the collegiate state for shooting pool. I mean, it's not as cool as swimming or football or anything like that, but I was serious enough where we competed. And our team, although I lost that state, actually went to the national championships and won. But I really wanted to play at a very high level. And so I shot a lot back then. And since then, it's come on down just because there's less people I know who play pool. And gosh, especially with COVID, it's a lot harder to just go out to a hall. But that's something I still enjoy. As you mentioned, woodworking is actually a phenomenal hobby that I found only very recently.
Oh, that's great. And
yeah, so it's only in the past probably year and a half that I've started accumulating all of this knowledge and builds. So I grew up, I think the last time I was in a house was probably when I was 11. So after 11, I lived, with my mom in several apartments. And then as I entered college, as you do in college, you just rent apartments, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of hanging a picture on a wall, for me, was almost a no-no, right? Because we hang a picture on a wall, you got to be careful, you don't get your security deposit back.
Sure.
I never had anything I needed to fix because the supervisor would do it.
Right. They had
Yeah, and since we lived, especially college into med school and even residency, since there was never a permanent place, all the furniture I bought was, stuff that would be from IKEA and stuff that would be good enough because there was no idea of permanence yet. So fast forward now, and I'm in San Diego, and I'm settled here. I have a house, and the idea of hanging a picture on a wall. It's like, well, I actually have to learn how to hang a picture on a wall, like where to find the stud, what kind of nails to use, and when things break down. I mean, YouTube is such a phenomenal thing to fix things.
Yes, it is.
Fix a dishwasher, fix my garbage disposal, and so I bought the two basic things that any most home people would have, which is a cordless drill and an impact driver.
Yes.
And as I start to learn all these things, it just sort of spiraled out. I essentially taught myself, and that doesn't sound as great of an accomplishment as it is nowadays, because you can learn how to do so many things.
Right.
But it's become such a joy because that literally is, like you said, spine surgery is a lot of carpentry. It's a lot of specific observations on very important details. Mm-hmm. And woodwork is really no different. And there's a sense of creativity to it. And it's been such a wonderful joy to carry that home and, to be able to build like a bookshelf or planters, for our flowers or a variety of things that really get out that creativity and free time.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that so much because I'm the same way, learned how to smoke on the big green egg, smoke meats, all from YouTube. And now it's like one of my passions and hobbies and, one of the things that brings me joy. Can you dive into what you just said, because I think you're spot on. Surgery is still very much a creative. Every patient, right, has their own pathologies. They have their own history and physical. And you as a surgeon, right, are trained to not only see what they have, but determine their treatment path and kind of where in your hands, like what you can do to help them. And so it's very much a creative process. However, with the advance of AI, of planning, of robotics, it's becoming more of that's evolving into, you now have your own God-given ability and your training plus technology. Where do you see yourself now? Where do you see your practice going? Can you kind of just wrap on that a little bit, like what you do today and kind of your treatment plans and your differential diagnosis and kind of where things are today with the tools that you have? Maybe you learned from Dr. Lehman, right? Robotics or I don't know. It's a long-winded question. I'm very fascinated in your perspective and opinion on this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely think you're right. And we're taught very early on in medicine that there is an art to it. And I think what encompasses in that art is understanding that not every condition, not every patient is a set square peg that you're looking for a square hole, right? And even disease states in and of themselves can be variable, and both in their presentation, severity, and treatment. So, unlike, a lot of my friends are coders or software engineers, which are, there's creativity in building the software and program, but the coding itself can be very regimented in their language. With medicine, understanding some of these ambiguities, I think, is a part of that art, and to navigate that with another human being, right? So with another person that could have been you in another time, or could be your own family member who has the same anxieties, emotions, fears, and expectations, and working with them on that as this very miniature team to help get them better. I would say with the tools that we have now, I do agree. There are a lot of tools and technologies that I'm a believer of in helping us make our decisions and carry out those treatments. And you mentioned robotics as one of them, which I think is a very exciting field that is being developed. It's been developed for many, many years, and now it's entering more of the mainstream consciousness. Other types of technologies have been readily available as well, such as navigation and other types of assistance of visualization in the OR. AI and machine learning and predictive planning, right, are also very powerful tools that we're on the horizon for adoption and for critical assessment, right? And I think all of these, and the best analogy that I make fairly often is like driving. Right. And you may have heard this, you may have heard me talk about this as well.
Please keep going though.
Yeah.
Many haven't probably heard this.
But, in terms of driving, I would say that driving is the objective of getting from point A to point B. And we all learn how to drive by sitting in the seat. We learn how to change the gears, and there's a go and there's a brake, and then you get from point A to point B. And as cars have become more advanced, there are now all of these assistance systems, right? I mean, before I know how to drive with a stick shift, manual transmission. I learned how to drive. I had great enjoyment on it. And then there became the development of, the automatic transmission. And then there became the development of the dual clutch that will shift, right, with two flywheels. And then there became that advancement of Tesla's transmission, which only has one speed. It doesn't shift at all, right? And all of these things are helping us get from point A to point B by reducing our cognitive load, right? So we don't have to shift, and freeing us with the abilities to do other things. Now you have cruise control. Now you have adaptive cruise control, right? So now you're still in the driver's seat, but with so many assistive technologies to get you from point A to point B in a safer way. And lastly, of course, there's this partial to full automation of autopilot or self-driving, whatever you want to call it, that a lot of car makers have, where there's a automated software machine learning program that can detect all of the things that we're always looking at and
Right.
helps you get from point A to point B, right?
That's
When I
amazing.
analogize this to surgery, it's really no different. You know, if you were to boil down what I'm trying to do as a surgeon, I'm trying to accomplish with surgery, right? So with some sort of surgical technique in opening up the body and fixing or reconstructing or removing some portion of the spine or spinal nerves or tumors to make someone better. And, I would say that 15 years ago, 20 years ago, there are and were established surgical techniques. With the advent of technology, there's now a lot of assistance in either machine learning or partial automation or predictive planning to help carry those out either better, faster, safer, or with new techniques that weren't available before.
Sure.
And so I think that there's a part of surgery that has not changed, which is the treatment of the condition, but there is a part that's fundamentally changing in how we carry that out. And I think the ability to be open to that, as a part of the learning process, to incorporate that in is so important to advance the field as a whole. And as with any adoption of technology and development, there are dead ends, there are, types of techniques that don't pan out. But I think unless we're open to the discovery of that in a very safe and methodical way, there's no other way to advance and make things better for the people we're taking care of.
Well, that's beautifully said and well said. I mean, I agree with you completely. I mean, I think it's the future, and it's just a matter of like the adoption, the learning curve, how we as industry can help you as the clinician in your practice, in your goals, and in your treatment options and plans. And I think we're there, but there's a much more mature market. You mentioned this. Robotics have been around for a long time, and I went to the Surgical Disruptive Technology Summit in Houston, which was more general bariatric, GI, this was an opportunity for me, just as a curious person in this space, to observe a more mature market, which is been owned by Da Vinci. We've got Medtronic's got the Hugo. There's other companies there, Exact, and other things that are doing a lot, there in that space. And so I think we can start to see some macro trends and kind of like how they're handling, technology, disruptive, disposable robotics in the ambulatory surgery space, right? That's where they are. They've been doing this for quite some time. And so it's exciting for me. Spine is my love and my world. And it's fun for me to kind of just think what if and what is going to be next, down the road, with people like yourself driving that car that's automated. It's so fascinating. So not a question, just more of a statement. And I think that how do we get more adoption? Because I love your car analogy. I also love your bowling analogy. It's, bowling with prevent the gutters, prevent those, and just kind of guide you towards ultimately the goal, which is the strike. And, from my perspective, what we need to do is build community, spread awareness, develop a clinical mastery, right? And I'm talking mainly to sales reps as well as maybe some surgeons that are still in that, they haven't adopted. And then just developing all together, the technology together. Like, what do you think, like, how will we get there? Will there be a society, right? Similar to Solus, right? Will there be a society of surgical planning? That's something that I've kind of kicked around internally here. But what are your thoughts on what do we need to do to spread that awareness to get people on board? Because it's still a niche of a niche of a niche right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that in terms of the adoption and specifically to a society, I would say probably it's been about 2 years now, I guess back before the pandemic hit and a lot of people's priorities shifted and had to change for a little bit. But a lot of the key opinion leaders in robotics who are championing the technology and the discovery and validation of it were discussing putting together an independent society. This way, it brings together like-minded surgeons who can be chosen from a pool, whether to give a talk or whether to provide information. And so it's not just necessarily chosen from a surgeon at random, but by people who have self-identified of being very enthusiastic, about that space. So that is still floating around. I think that it's just taking some time to gather momentum. In terms of adoption, I think the pace, to be honest, from my standpoint, which is of course very biased, can seem fairly slow. And from your standpoint, I'm sure being on the technological side and seeing all the underpinnings of what this technology can be may also seem on the slower side. But I think that it's right about at pace, because we've all seen, and you've been in the spine and technology space for a long enough time to see that when new technologies are released, there's a lot of excitement. And sometimes that early adoption can fuel the excitement in a fairly biased way, where it ends up, maybe 5-10 years down the line, people realize, hey, it actually didn't help people that much. And, one of the things that I've seen and continue to see is the DNASys system, so the dynamic stabilization system, where the rods are made out of cord or they're flexible. It was a very noble idea, right? And I'm sure the initial biomechanical studies were favorable. And it's not until you get this longer term follow-up, 5-10 years down the line, that you do see people are not, as a population, are not better, right? They have higher reoperation rates, they have higher osteoarthrosis rates, and that we actually find out that fusion is king, right? I mean, sure, there are soft landings for longer deformity constructs and things that are a bit more specific, but dynamic stabilization for degenerative, issues was not the answer. And, a lot of people had unfavorable outcomes during that period of the discovery and validation. So I think, when I present robotics presentations at conferences, or when I present my own research, and there are critiques or criticisms or, constructive arguments, I think that's very healthy, because one, it makes us on the robotic side revisit those points to make sure that they're still valid. And two, it encourages us to be very, very diligent, right? Because in the process of trying to win the critics, it makes the technology better and safer. And so, although, the first Mazor robot was like, 2004, 2005, the Coke can, and then it's taken, we're almost 20 years until we have this, CNC 6 degrees of freedom robotic arm. That process, although it's been long, I think it's been appropriate. And now we're right on the edge where we can see a real expansion of its abilities, right? And people are already talking about a variety of things, but I think the pace is still appropriate to make sure that it's going forward safely, so that there isn't just some huge error, some huge, terrible complication that turns a lot of surgeons right on the border completely off to this paradigm shift. And I honestly believe that this is a shift, not just the introduction of a new technology like navigation or camera systems. This is going to change how surgery is being done, just like how Da Vinci changed how urologic surgery and now general and gynecological surgery is done. The advent of partial automation and the advent of machine learning and predictive planning is something that wasn't even thought of 5 or 10 years ago, and is now going to be exceptionally powerful on how we treat and see and care for spine patients.
So well said. And it's just great to know people like yourself are out there, people like Sharad Rajpal, who I did my first podcast episode with, talking about how, everything he's doing today is drastically different than what he was trained on. And somebody actually called that out in his training, like basically as technology comes in and it'll change the way you do even routine procedures, right? And I think that's what, you're talking about, the pace being appropriate. Yeah, I mean, I would agree. It's crawl, walk, run, right? It's kind of test it out, figure it out. And then we're kind of in that jogging stage right now, maybe, which is exciting. and everybody wants to go fast, but if it's not safe and reproducible and in something that we can teach, like as you said, is a proper way to do surgery for these patients, right? Somebody's mother and father, brother, right, and sister, then it needs to be done appropriately. And I think that's well said. It's a good call out. What would you say is a common myth about surgeons? Surgery.
Yeah.
Just in general.
Yeah, I think I'd like to think that a common myth about surgeons are that it's a very common one, we're all mean and arrogant and, despots in the OR, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I'm sure people have their own personal experiences. You've been in the OR, gosh, for years and years.
Wow. Yep.
So some of the myths are born out of experiences of truth.
Yeah.
I've been so fortunate enough, at least, to have been trained and to have been parts of departments that is no longer the case, right? So,
Sure.
Specifically at USC, the neurosurgeons there are phenomenal. And I think a lot of my temperament was being able to see that a normal person's temperament functions exceptionally well, where you don't have to be the tyrant or the king to get things done. And a lot of what has been shown, right, even in independent studies, is that teamwork is safer for patient care. Certainly there's a hierarchy and there are levels of experience, but when the OR functions as a team and people are comfortable bringing up issues, it's so much safer for the patient, right? Which is, of course, the priority of any of these cases.
Yes.
When I was at Columbia University and especially now at UC San Diego, so fortunate to be around people who are very respectful, exceptionally respectful. Yes. And none of this, maybe the older myth 20, 25 years ago, the idea of surgeons being or having to be these, megalomaniacs,
Sure.
because they've worked hard to get to where they are. And it is a position, especially at that time, with an exceptional amount of power in the hospital and in the care system. But I would say that nowadays, I'd like to think that is not completely gone, because there are, some of these are personalities ingrained in just certain people who happen to be surgeons. But I think something that as a community of medical and surgical professionals, recognizing that it's not helpful, nor is it welcome. I think another myth that may be surprising to at least some trainees, so either college students, medical students, surgical residents, is that to be a surgeon, you have to be, a dexterous virtuoso. I think every surgeon would like to consider themselves above average. And, if you ask every surgeon, of course, that's not possible.
That's right.
I would like to say, though, to reassure folks who are in college, medical school, or as a resident, that what makes a good surgeon, an average amount of human dexterity is more than enough. If you can brush your teeth, if you can comb your hair, if you can chew gum and walk without falling, which is the average person, you have more than enough skill to be an excellent surgeon, because the surgical tools in the OR are built for normal people. And so all the other things that make you a good surgeon are things like your surgical judgment, right? The decisions that you make inside and outside the OR, your temperament, right? And being able to handle dangerous situations safely, or if you don't know a situation, to be able to ask others for help, again, to make your patients better and safer. Certainly within the field of surgery, there are people who are exceptionally good, just like if you're a pianist or violinist, there are people who can perform at an exceptionally high level. And these people become, very good at what they do to an even higher degree. But, just because you can't write cursive in your left hand, right, doesn't necessarily mean that you won't be a good surgeon. And it's something
that makes you want to try it.
I remember being a medical student, and it was a misconception, but we were of course bored. And so I would write with my right hand, and then I would write with my left hand, and I'd brush my teeth with my left hand to try and build this idea of a dexterous, a dexterous scenario, right? A million. But it's something I do like to say for those coming up behind me, that that's not something that you should worry about, right? There are
Wow.
much other more important things to worry about.
That's fascinating. I mean, you talked about temperament, dexterity, and the humility to ask for help, right? Those are big. Those are really important. And when I think about some of the best surgeons that I was, fortunate enough to spend a lot of years with and help them in their practice and be a part of that team, that you mentioned, right? You're absolutely right. That's what separates, good from great. When, Dr. Pham, and you're a humble guy, but when did you know that you were good? When did you know that you could do this at a high level?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's in residency, because in residency you start to be exposed to procedural and surgical scenarios and events and cases that demand of you the performance that is expected, either for someone at your station or for someone who is a neurosurgeon. I think in early residency, everyone is always trying to do their best and to do a good job. But really, it's the feedback, it's the personal and, formal feedback that I received as a resident, where it began to tell me that I'm going to be okay, right? That this is something that not only am I average at, but hopefully I'm above average at. And if I work at it, right, it's not something that's just a talent that you let, sit idle,
Right.
but I have the capacity, or at least a high enough ceiling, to become very good at it.
Thank
And, I was fortunate enough that several of my mentors, out of their own accord, pulled me aside and let me know that I was good, right? And this is something where, as with most trainees and residents, if they are good at something, I make sure to take the time to tell them, because not only does it reaffirm something that they may not know,
right?
It's something that they can realize and then continue to foster to be better, right? So
Absolutely.
I was fortunate enough to be the recipient of some of that feedback, which is in a way potentially a self-fulfilling prophecy if it's something that, there is talent, but is also something that I was, fortunate enough to hear to confirm that. And that's when, having that positive feedback and focusing myself on that has allowed me to continue to hopefully perform at a higher level, and to continue to be an example of that, as one of the leaders here at UC San Diego.
That's awesome. And it's great to see you paying it forward, right, with the younger surgeons and tomorrow's surgeons, as you got that great feedback, because I think that any of us, regardless of field, have absolutely, we long for the pat on the back. We long for the, hey, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work, right? And not that I'm an advocate for a participation badge or trophy. I'm against that. That's the opposite way of how I'm raising my kids. But I absolutely believe that sometimes, especially for those people that you've recognized, and I'm sure you don't just dole out that feedback, right? For those people and the residents that you see today as being someone that can be good for surgery and good for patient communities wherever they end up, that's amazing that you're doing that, and I love to hear that. And I'm sure they do too.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I just remember when I was it must have been either late medical school or early residency. Maybe I was an intern. I just started. The general surgery literature had just released some study somehow, and I can't remember the study design, but essentially they followed residents in training, and their conclusion, right, after various amounts of feedback and review and questionnaires and all this stuff, the conclusion they came to, which was addressed to surgeons at academic centers, program directors, and other surgeons, the conclusion and exhortation, in a way, is that you have to tell trainees what they're doing well. Because the idea in surgery, at least in the 90s and 2000s, is it's a tough place, it's harsh, it's a boot camp,
Right.
there's no positive feedback at all, everyone is rough, and you just got to grit your way through it, and if you make it, you make it. But this article was saying that if you don't tell trainees that they're doing something good, they will stop doing it, right?
Wow.
So if someone is, rounding early and capturing information and save someone, right, by being diligent, if you don't tell them that that was a good thing, they will stop doing it and it will extinguish over time, right? And it was so fascinating because then it applies to a whole bunch of things, not just good things that they're doing, but surgical skill, patient care, teamwork and team leadership. All of these are important to tell trainees, because I remember being in that position as a first and second year. You're just trying to do a good job. And a lot of what I'm doing is random, right? I told a nurse, good job. I hope it's the right thing to do. I found a lab value and I bumped it up to my senior. I hope that was the right thing to do. But unless I'm told that, yes, that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, the affirmation.
It may extinguish over time. Yeah.
That's fascinating, because that is translatable across anything, right? As a salesperson, as a sales professional and sales leader, we have got to recognize people that are doing things great. I mean, recognition, I think, at least for me and a lot of people that are wired just like me, recognition is what we seek, and we seek to be valued by others, right? Awards and all that stuff, money, whatever. It's nice and it's I would say needed and necessary, but really you want, at least for me, I want to be seen as a valuable asset to the team, seen as someone that's providing good things and or great things, right? And it's important to call that out. So I would love to read that article, because I am equally as fascinated by that, and just in terms of psychology that's behind that. I got a business major and a psych minor, and I use my psych degree a lot more. I repeat this a lot, but I use that daily, because this is people. This is what you're talking about, is how do we elevate the younger generation up to be the best versions of themselves, right? In surgery. So yeah. We're coming up on that time. I feel like I could talk to you for hours on end, but you are an extremely busy person with a lot of people relying on you and counting on you, Dr. Pham. So, I guess one last thing, if you've got time for it.
Of course, absolutely, Jay.
Okay. Where do you see? So I could go two ways. I'm going to give you two questions and you pick. One thing you wish you had known when you started, or where do you see your practice in 5 years? Your choice. Or you can get whatever, however you want to answer that.
Yeah, no. I think one thing I wish I knew, is always a kind of a poignant question and something I think of great interest, no matter who the listener is, whether there's someone who's at my station right now building a practice, someone who is 10, 15 years older and thinks about that same question, or more importantly, the folks who are coming up behind, right? And I think a lot of times the audience is folks who want to know, right? And my whole idea is I always hated reinventing the wheel, right? When I was at Northwestern, I built the neurosurgery interest group, because that way there was a repository of information, so those coming after us would be better. And when I was a resident, it was always the same thing, talking with medical students back then. And then when I was a senior resident, telling all of the people behind me my accomplishments and my failures, because the whole benefit of experience is so that the folks behind you will be better than you. And one of my mentors in medical school told me that as a first-year medical student, that the icon and success of a teacher is that your students will one day be better than you, or at where you're at faster. And it was poignant back then. And I am surprised and not surprised that nearly almost 20 years later, it has become such a core part of my beliefs in training. So, some things that I wish I had known earlier. Yeah. For medical school, it's going to be hard, right? I think everyone goes into medical school knowing that it'll be hard. Mm-hmm. Something that I wish I knew was how important your support system is, right? So, and it's something I always ask for people who are entering medical school. Right. Make sure you have a good support system, right? Whether it's your friends, your family, a significant other or partner, and you're not alone, right? And that applies even more so in neurosurgery residency. When you're a neurosurgery resident, you are the smallest team in the hospital, right? There are only a total of 14 to 21 neurosurgery residents in any given institution, because there's only 1 to 2 to 3 a year at any given institution.
And for comparison, not to interrupt, but what is another specialty of surgery?
Sure. So, at USC, we took 2 residents a year for neurosurgery, up to 3. Orthopedics took 10 a year across 5 years, so 50 ortho residents. Pediatrics took, I think, 20 a year.
Right.
So 20 across 3 years, so that's 60 pediatric residents. It was one of the largest internal medicine programs. There were almost 50 internal medicine residents a year across 3 years. So that's 150 residents. And you're a team of 2 in any given year, right? Sure. So it's a very small cadre.
Thank you for that context.
Yeah. And so it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay, especially when you're tired or when you don't know something, because you don't get into neurosurgery without functioning at a very high level, right? I mean, if you match as a neurosurgery resident, that means you have done an exceptional amount of research, you've gotten good grades, you're very likable, right? And from a social standpoint, and you have had enough foresight to understand how to get into residency, right? So these are, socially and emotionally and academically intelligent people. And there's this trap, I think, to continue to forge ahead alone as a superstar, right? Because if you match into neurosurgery, you are likely at the top of your class in some way. And the pressure of functioning at a high level all the time as a resident, or even now, as an early, staff assistant professor, remains. And it's so important that it's okay to ask for help, ask for support, and function as a team. It doesn't detract in any kind of way, because as you move forward, just like so many mottos and sayings, you do move further together, right?
Sure.
And it's so much more important, and in the long run, it's so much better, both for yourself and for the people you're taking care of, to ask for help and to lean on others, and it raises everyone. And, I functioned, I was in residency in 2010, 2017. And early on, I think this type of machismo was, it was prized, right? I think they were badges of honor for people who were able to do things themselves and to do things independently and to power through it.
Right.
And although I was one to pride myself on it, obviously now, if a resident asked me for help, or when I was a chief and all of my juniors asked me for help, I was always available. And it struck me that my paradigm and viewpoint of that had changed. And I no longer value this idea of the lone, what's it called? The guy on a horse, the Lone Ranger. Yeah, the Lone Ranger, right? The hero who goes in alone. Life doesn't function that way. And it's
I think that you're touching on something that as a society, or maybe generationally, we have shifted as well, right? Look at social media. Look at people are taking Yelp reviews or comments as they take that on its face, right? Because it's like, that's how we socialize our interactions, our communications with one another, right? Via social media, right? So I guess where I'm going that is, it used to be kind of like, I'll figure it out. I'm not going to ask for directions. The machismo, piece that you spoke of, like, I'm just going to find my way. Today, it's much more efficient to get directions on your GPS and maybe use ways to figure out where people, hey, this is backed up. You're going to go this different way. It's okay to ask for help and to use technology to get you there, right? And that's why I think it's so fun. What we're doing right now, this has been wonderful, wonderful experience for me. Thank you for spending this time. And I think that anyone that ends up watching this is going to get something out of it. And that's the whole point of the Sultans of Sales podcast. It's like, I want to share stories of other amazing people like yourself, surgeons, right? We've had different people on the show, but I want to be able to share this. I feel fortunate to know you, Dr. Pham, and I feel fortunate to have access to you, and thank you again. And others now can get something from this, and that's positive, right? And so I'm really glad that you were able to, that we were able to do this today.
No, it was definitely a pleasure. I feel humbled, right, that you would select me and choose me to be on a platform like this, and you know, for me to share my thoughts and to reach a variety of your audience and listeners.
It was great, and we'll do it again. And I don't know if you'll be around at joint sections, but I'll be in your neck of the woods here at the end of the month. So if you're there, we'll come say hi.
No, I'll definitely be there. I'll see you there.
Awesome. Dr. Pham, thank you so much. Thank you guys, the audience, for tuning in to the Sultans of Sales. We post a new episode every Tuesday morning. Check us out, YouTube, soon to be Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. Have a great day. Thanks again, Dr. Pham.
Appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. Take care. Bye-bye.